Grasslands are an overlooked biome. There's a lot of birds that make it their home.
Thank you for tuning in to Hannah and Eric Go Birding, a podcast by birders for birders.
I'm Hannah and he's Eric.
And we created this podcast to share adventures, sometimes misadventures, and opinions that we have on different birding topics. We're definitely not experts, and anything that we discuss that might be controversial, I want you to remember, their own opinions, they might be different from yours.
We're still in the middle of Tufted Puffin season here in Cannon Beach, Oregon.
Heck yeah, Tufted Puffin season!
So if you want to come out and see some really cool birds and you're in the area, we'd love to have you join us for a walk. We've had so many people on the walks, and we had a couple days that were a little tough to see the puffins, but it was I think it was because it was so hot. It was like in the 80s here, which is kind of unusual. And I think the puffins just like got up early and went out to the ocean to cool off.
Yeah, but they've been pretty darn easy to see overall through the whole season. So if you want to join us, come out to Cannon Beach, and if we're scheduled to do one, we'll go out with you and take you to go see puffins. If we're not scheduled, then we can...
We can maybe arrange something.
We can arrange something possibly, or at least point you in the right direction to get you on puffins up there at Haystack Rock.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of friends able to join us this year, which is cool.
Yeah, it's been super, super cool.
Yeah, so thank you if you've been able to join us. We also have another trip coming up that we want to talk about, our Naturalist Journeys trip to Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And we did have someone cancel a single room, so if you're interested in coming and you wanted a single room, please check out the link in our notes. And that is on October 15th to the 22nd, and I'm just so excited to get down to see some tropical birds.
I know, I can't wait.
Yeah, and
I mean, this nice sunny weather has been nice, but I would really like to have
tanagers in your future.
Some tanagers and
toucans.
Yeah, oh yeah.
What else?
All the
Oropendulas.
Oh my gosh, the Oropendulas are so much, and then the noise they make, the water drop, the bloop.
Yeah. So if you want to check that out, make sure to check out our show notes because we would love to have you join us. So if you'd like to support our show, because there are costs that go into hosting a podcast, we love doing it and we do it out of the goodness of our own heart, but there's also some costs. And if you want to do that, we do have a Buy Me a Coffee or a Venmo that you can support our show on. So thank you to everyone who's done that. We really appreciate it. But also just share, our show with others is a great way to help support us and, not have to commit any money or anything like that. So yeah, just share our episodes with others. We would definitely appreciate that. We do also have some merchandise available if you want to have some cool merch on our Bonfire account, which is you can access through Buy Me a Coffee. It's convoluted, but you'd be able to figure it out. Y'all are smart people.
Yeah.
And I also have some earrings for sale on there too. So if you want some cool bird gear, that's one way to check it out.
Yeah. All right, so Hannah, you've got episodes of other podcasts that come out in between episodes of Hannah and Eric Go Birding. You have Women Birders Happy Hour and Bird Nerd Book Club. Last week was Bird Nerd Book Club. Who'd you have? What book did you read, and who'd you have on?
So I had When the Forest Dreams by Andrea Ezerins, which is a adult, fiction romance novel, and it was the second one that I've done so far. It's really a great read. It's very lovely. There's not just birds in it, but there's also, romance and all the other things that go into like actual fiction books. So please check that out anywhere you listen to podcasts.
All right, and then next week you've got an episode of Women Birders Happy Hour coming out. But who'd you have on for that one?
Yeah, so I had Isabel Brofar.
Who will you have on?
Isabel Brofar, who is a biologist based in Washington State, which I really want to go check out her research work that she's doing up there. So please check out that episode anywhere you listen to podcasts. So, Eric, we're going a couple places.
Yes, we are. So, in September, we are going to Hawaii. We've got a couple people have sent us some suggestions of things to do. We have reached out to Lance Tonino to try to get something arranged to go out birding with him. We are going to get our scuba recertifications done while we're there. And I'm
trying to make Eric go surfing, too. So... Yeah. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, maybe some more suggestions, maybe. But we'll see. Super excited about that in September.
We're going to the Big Island.
Yes.
So if you have any thoughts about like restaurants or like cool places to go birding or places that we should check out, please hit us up with that.
Yeah, I think we're there for
a
week, and we have 2 days at Flance, 2 days scuba diving, and the rest of it is whatever we can figure out to do.
Yeah.
So
I kind of just want to sit in the ocean the whole time.
and not do anything.
Would that be weird?
It would be that'd be fine.
Okay.
And then in October we're going to Costa Rica with a bunch of our listeners, and if you want to join us, the link is in the show notes. You can join us in Costa Rica in October, and then in November, Rio Grande Valley Birding Festival, back down guiding at in the valley. Very excited about that. And then in April, we're going to be going back to the border, but not the valley. So up in Del Rio, Birding the Border is another bird festival on the border with Texas and Mexico in April, and it's going to be our first year guiding at that. We're super excited to do that.
And that's with Texas A&M Birding Extension Office. So, yeah, it'll be fun to check out that festival and see what they've got going on up there.
Absolutely.
So that brings us to our June Bird Nerd giveaway. What we had for you is 3 summer reading books, which were Around the World in 80 Birds, My Penguin Year, and A Sweet Wild Note. Mm-hmm. So, Eric, what did we ask folks to tell us?
So we wanted to know what everyone's summer reading list looked like, mostly to give Hannah some ideas of what she needs to be reading, but also because... We need you to answer a book-related question to get some books. So by June 23rd, which was just the other day, we wanted people to let us know what their summer reading list was. We got a bunch of entries, all sorts of great ideas for Hannah.
Some birdie, some not birdie.
Exactly, all over the place. But we had a winner randomly selected of all the entries, and who was that, Hannah?
It was Kathy, who said The Glitter and the Gold by John Donne, which is
hummingbirds, right?
Yeah, which is a great book about hummingbirds throughout the Americas. So thank you, Kathy, and everyone else who submitted, and we'll figure out getting you your prize. I know we said on social media that this episode was going to be about black-capped vireos, and I apologize, but this opportunity came up that I just had to take advantage of. So on Instagram a couple weeks ago, I saw, well, actually just this week.
A couple of days ago.
Yeah, I saw something about the America's Grassland Coalition, which there's a bunch of organizations that, are super birdie.
At least 10 partner organizations.
That are bird related for the most part, are taking a part of. So I was like, hey, what's this all about? Mm-hmm. And we found out that it's America's Grassland Week. Is June 21st to the 27th. And we're like, what's so great about grasslands?
Yeah. What even are they? It's just a bunch of grass.
So we reached out to a couple of partners with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, Maggie Hanna, and from Cornell Lab for Ornithology, Wen-Fei Tong, to tell us more about grasslands and why birders should care about them. Well, we're joined by Maggie Hanna, who is with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. But first off, before we talk about grasslands and all this really important stuff, would you please tell us about yourself?
Happy to. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Maggie Hanna, and I serve Bird Conservancy of the Rockies as the director of the Central Grasslands Roadmap Initiative. The initiative was born out of wildlife conservation communities in that for many decades, conservation has been really focused on species or parcel-specific conservation. And I'm sure you all have heard these pieces of data, but grassland birds are one of our single most declining species categories. And a lot of that is from loss of grassland, so loss of habitat. And unfortunately, you cannot do that work parcel specific, and we needed to look at the biome at large. So the initiative is really intended to bring together multiple sectors, countries, sovereign nations, communities, to make sure that we are doing conservation in a way that protects the biome and not just specific acres. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised on a ranch in south central Colorado, and I manage my family ranch today. So we run a cow-calf operation. So a lot of my background and interest in this work is based on land use and land management. And I have the unique opportunity of existing on both sides of the fence as a conservation practitioner and convener, but also as someone who is managing acres and livestock on the ground. I spent the bulk of my career working in perpetual conservation easements for farm and ranch families around the state of Colorado. And I have served as the director for the Central Grasslands Roadmap Initiative since early 2024. So have had an unbelievable opportunity to learn about conservation in many nations, in many communities, in different languages, and see how community and producer-driven conservation really does lead to durable outcomes for an ecosystem in decline.
Awesome. So you're in Colorado. What are grasslands, and where are grasslands around the world, around the U.S. or?
Well, it's such an exciting year to talk about this. And this is where I will be a bit guarded in the definition. Grasslands can look many different ways, but they are vegetation sites that are predominated by grasses. My focus is on the central grasslands, which are a defined biome from Saskatchewan, Canada to Chihuahua, Mexico, the Rocky Mountains to the Mississippi River. But we work with partners across North America and the world. Grasslands exist in every state in the US, in every province in Canada, and every state in Mexico. And like if you are in the southeast, longleaf pine savannas, to those of us from the west, might look like a forest, but they are systems predominated by grass. And so they are also defined as part of our grassland systems. In the Pacific Northwest, we have sort of sage country, which still are tend to be predominated by range or grassland species, grass species. So everything can be a grassland. And I will say, as part of the America's Grasslands Coalition, part of this work has been to map current and historic grasslands. And so we can actually see what has been lost in terms of habitat. And then the other sort of exciting piece about 2026, in alignment with the America's Grasslands Coalition campaign, it is also the UN designated International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists, celebrating rangelands around the world and people who manage livestock in those systems. So Mongolia, China, Africa, there are grasslands and rangelands on every continent except Antarctica.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I got a bachelor's degree in natural resource management and had to take a lot of rangeland classes. And I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but now, that I'm getting older and into birding, I do really, appreciate when we go out to a rangeland or a grassland and go birding there. But why are our grasslands important?
Well, our grasslands are important for a variety of reasons. And I will start with the big one, since this is a bird conversation. Functional grasslands are habitat to hundreds of species of animals, insects, invertebrates, pollinators, large ruminants. And so habitat is a big piece. Carbon sequestration, I think a lot of people have been excited about trees and their connection to carbon. But as a person who lives in the West and watches many forests burn, the very cool part of grasslands is that grasslands store their carbon in the soil. And so even if they were to burn, that carbon is not lost. That carbon is still intact. And so they are our largest carbon sink in the world. And then grasslands in many parts of the world, grass-based businesses are the economic driver for those communities. So in some spaces that is like ranching, and there is the limitation of a higher and better use is challenging on those communities. So they end up being an important economic scenario for many communities across the country.
So we're talking about like the need for conservation, the need for like protection of the grasslands across the U.S. and across the world. What has happened to our grasslands that necessitated that?
I think one of the things that defines the actual ecosystem of grasslands is that they are relatively easily converted. And the largest impact to grasslands is that we lose these acres and functional habitat to conversion. And whether that is row crop agriculture, we plow up native grasslands, or suburban and urban encroachment, we build houses on those grasslands, or we are seeing in some parts of the grasslands woody plant encroachment. So as we look at sort of the Midwest and South, we see mesquite and eastern red cedar encroaching on these habitats. And from a grassland bird perspective, the interesting thing about woody plant encroachment is that to a layperson, you think, oh, look, things are living here, like what a good thing that something could survive. But grassland birds will not utilize an acre of land if there's only a single tree on that acre, because it provides habitat to predators. And so they are at risk. And so then we are fragmenting their functional habitat in a way that we can and should be managing for. So conversion is the biggest loss and fragmentation of that habitat. And as I shared a little bit in sort of the background to the Central Grasslands Roadmap Initiative, intact habitat is really important. And so even if we can protect a specific set of acres, if the neighbor fragments, that disjoints the migration corridors for most of our wildlife species. So it is important that we do this work at scale in a way that allows the bulk of habitat to be protected.
So you work with a lot of ranchers in your position, and you have that, great background of being a rancher yourself. How do the people that you work with, how are they perceiving this effort?
I may be a little bit naive, but we have all lived in a time where there was a lot of animosity between the sort of environmental communities and agricultural producers. And I think the sort of exciting part about grassland conservation and specifically livestock producers or ranchers is that we really want the same thing. We want to have grass right side up and functional systems. And I am very hopeful that there are opportunities for us to, like as a rancher, when you're managing to your sort of lowest common denominator, so let's call it one of the 17 focal grassland bird species, everything else benefits. So like your habitat is better for the birds and you have more grass for forage for livestock. So I think there's a lot of like symbiosis between ranching and grassland conservation. I won't speak broadly to like other types of environmental work, but I am very hopeful that like there are partners coming to the table that have not been historic partners or allies, and that this is a space where ranchers can really start to see external support for an industry that has sort of long been criticized for a variety of reasons. And I think we can all do for running better businesses. I am this afternoon hosting a workshop on succession planning. So much about getting young people back to ranching is creating these opportunities where we're, looking at technology. How can these businesses support a young family? How can these communities ensure that we have the ability to bring young people back? Like it's very hard to think about bringing a young family back to a ranch when there's no school, no grocery store. And so the grasslands are really important, but like really the big piece of this work is to look at it holistically. How do you keep a small hotel in business and allow a school district to function and a fire department and allow these businesses to support a place where humans can inhabit? And I think to that point, some of the environmental work that had happened in the past often looked at preservation, so removing the human dimension. And this current initiative is really about people focused, people centered. How do you do this work with the people who call these places home, whether those are ranchers, indigenous communities, rural community members, etc. So I think the ranchers are pretty into it. Like, yeah, if we can have cattle, great.
Well, and it seems like there's been a shift in the mindset of conservation that historically, I remember growing up, middle school, high school, talking about conservation, that it's like, okay, well, you fence off an area and that's it. You leave it alone, let nature do its thing. But in grasslands, you were talking just a few minutes ago about the conversion of grasslands, either through economic means, so converting it to cities and whatever else we're going to develop it into, or just natural conversion from succession from a grassland to a forest. That's also a conversion. That's also a disturbance to the habitat. So it requires active management and active work on the land to do this. And this isn't something that I remember getting taught younger growing up. It was like, no, you leave it alone. That's what it is. And so with this initiative, it's really encouraging the land users, the land owners, to continue doing something, continue getting an economic benefit out of the land, but in a slightly different way, so that they can conserve it for a longer period of time into the future.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple pieces that are worth talking about, sort of the way grasslands have evolved was under grazing pressure. So historically, that was bison moving based on climate and forage availability, and they moved in big herds. And one of the spaces where like a lot of these grassland conservation partners are focused is helping ranchers make a transition from a continual grazing scenario where you turn cattle out and you see them in the fall to a higher intensity rotation where your acres are getting higher pressure for a shorter amount of time, which allows rest, so that you are mimicking the way that these systems evolved originally. And so I think there is a lot to like just being more involved in management and less about hands off, because these systems do provide so much benefit to the general public. You know, we're producing food and fiber. Many of these landscapes are now producing energy, whether that is wind or solar or other components of energy, and they are sequestering our carbon, and they're providing all of this wildlife habitat. And we can do that, manage those systems in a way that doesn't have inputs like some of our other peers and other agricultural commodity programs. This allows us to focus on like really fostering a native and natural system.
So why is Bird Conservancy of the Rockies involved in this campaign?
Well, Bird Conservancy of the Rockies is involved in this campaign because we are deeply committed to the conservation of bird habitat and bird species, and grassland birds have been a focus of Bird Conservancy of the Rockies for, I would say, comfortably the last decade. I think, I don't know if you guys know Willa Cather, but she was an author, prairie woman. She has a line about anyone can love the mountains, but it takes a soul to love the prairie. And, you know, I am physically here based in Colorado. Colorado is one of the Intermountain states. So half of the state is high country and half of the state is grasslands. And it is remarkable how much attention our tourism dollars, our policy, our funding go to these sort of exciting, sexy towns and communities. Whereas, like, there's something about creating awareness for what is historically an underdog. You know, like we've all just driven past a lot of grassland systems because you look out and you think, ah, nothing there. But when you like actually slow down and put your feet on the ground, it is sort of a similar experience to the ocean. Like you can feel lost in it, and it's teeming with wildlife and creatures. And so I think Bird Conservancy is excited about creating awareness for these communities and these landscapes. And they, again, are really focused on bird conservation and bird habitat conservation. But so much of that is really about making sure that people are aware, and when there are opportunities to show up for those systems, that they do that. Yeah, so that is why Bird Conservancy has been involved in this campaign. And, you know, I think one of the tricky parts, and I will speak specifically to the Central Grasslands biome. So the landscape defined as the Central Grasslands is around 700 million acres. It crosses multiple countries, many states, many provinces, double digits in sovereign indigenous nations. And one of the things that is hard in the Central Grasslands biome is that the bulk of these acres are privately owned. Like that is the land ownership dynamic of this biome. And we can debate that on other levels. But the challenge there is that you have many, many, many decision makers, and the general public doesn't always feel like they have access to those systems. So how do you touch and feel and fall in love with those places? And that is the place where birding and bird data and bird habitat becomes like a really sexy draw to the general public. You can bird in a non-consumptive way that allows you to experience these places and fall in love with these places in a way that is friendly to people who call these places home. And so that is where Bird Conservancy, I think, is really excited about creating additional awareness, because there's no way for us to engage the general public if they've never felt like they got to put their feet on the ground in grasslands. And just a couple weeks ago, I hosted a gravel bike ride. So I'm currently just really hot on birders and gravel bikers. Like, what are the ways that you slow down to experience place? And those are two places where I am like so enthusiastic about the people who are enjoying that use of recreational time. I love them. They're excited, they care, they want to spend their income at the local cafe. Come on, I'll tell you about grasslands all day.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing
Yeah.
about grasslands and why they're important. I think you have so much great information about all this, and it's so cool that you have the background on both sides of the fence, as you said, to help bring more awareness to this.
Yeah, we're excited about it.
Well, we're here to chat about grasslands a little bit, and so we have an expert with us to chat about birds and grasslands. But please, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thanks so much for having me. It's really exciting to talk about two of my favorite topics, grasslands and birds, and just birding in general. So I'm Wenfei Tong, and I work at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is one of the 10 coalition organizations in this grasslands awareness campaign coalition. My day job is really lovely. It's to get to co-produce media about conservation subjects for conservation stakeholders to catalyze their goals. And one of the best things I get to do is work with different grasslands conservation groups and coalitions to advance the conservation goals. Yeah, I grew up in a city in Singapore, so a tropical city, and it's always been striking to me how someone who grew up in the tropics, in basically rainforest slash very urban environment, would end up having that happy place that's wide open spaces, Central Great Plains or the intermountain grasslands of Montana or the savannas of Africa or something like that. And I think one of the reasons could be as old as we just, as humans, as a species, have such a deep evolutionary history with grasslands, which gets a bit at your question of where are grasslands? And they're all over the world, and especially in the US, some of the grasslands that exist might be in your backyard. And I think I just grew up imprinting on the idea of these vast, wide open spaces as being so emblematic of freedom and being really enchanting for that reason. And so much later on, I managed to study grassland birds for my PhD as a postdoc, and also teach about grassland birds, and then spend some time leading people on basically birding expeditions, bird watching on horseback in various grasslands in Montana. Or if I was doing field work on grassland birds in Zambia, I would hop on a rancher's horse afterwards and check out the nests that way, or enjoy the ranch that way. So I think part of the beauty of grasslands is that they are working lands often, and humans evolved on grasslands with a lot of other grassland species, not just the birds, but large grassland ungulates. And what we often don't appreciate about grasslands is that they're so diverse, they're so biodiverse, and they need what ecologists or biologists call disturbance. So without enough grazing or without enough fire to keep back a lot of woody plants, essentially, you're not going to keep that grassland as grassland. It's not simple. It's not a simple fix like fencing off a national park of grasslands and saying, we won't touch it and it will remain pristine as grasslands forevermore. You've got to actively allow grazers to work on it. And that's what benefits the grassland birds.
So you mentioned like your backyard, and so grasslands don't necessarily have to be these big giant 1,000-acre expanses of area. You since you mentioned backyards, something within city limits, areas like that could be considered grasslands.
I guess within city limits gets tricky in terms of supporting the right kind of biodiversity.
Okay.
So maybe we should talk about what grasslands are not.
Oh, yes.
Grasslands are not. I think a lot of people associate the middle of the country with grasslands because you can drive for a long time and you pass, wheat is a type of grass, corn is a type of grass, and you pass a lot of these monocultures and think, oh, well, everything's fine. It's all this beautiful expanse of rolling green cropland. Those are not really biodiverse enough native grassland to qualify as the kind of grassland that we would be talking about in this kind of survey. Given that the central grasslands still have a lot of grasslands remaining, and then other types of grasslands that are much less appreciated are typically in the southeast, especially what we call savannas or woodland intermixed with grassland. So there can be in savannas some trees, but it's still called a grassland in terms of the types of biodiversity you find there. And similarly, in the mountain west, you get a lot of intermountain grasslands, or in this is one of my favorite little factoids. I think Appaloosas, the horses with the spotty bums, come from Palouse Prairie, and that's a special type of grassland only found in parts of Idaho, I think, primarily. It's a sort of intermountain grassland. And people also define things like sagebrush as a type of shrubland/grassland. So essentially anything where you can graze a lot of ungulates on would qualify as a grassland.
Well, and when you mentioned, the diversity level in the grasslands, that made me think about when we were looking for sage grouse, like in Central Oregon, and we were talking with the conservationist that was working on that, and he was talking about the soil and about, that there's a crust on it that has so many different microbes and forbs and all these different things. And I totally would have overlooked, the importance of all these tiny little components that go into that too. And so now that's something I carry with us when we've tried to go out and look for wildflowers a number of times. And those often occur in those like big grassland areas with a bunch of diversity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're looking for an area with a lot of diversity and lacking lots of woody plants, but an area that ungulates can graze, essentially.
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that grasslands used to extend from coast to coast in quite a big way. So elk, if you look at the historic range of elk, that extended very far east. And elk tend to graze on grasslands, but now they're really limited to little patches of typically mountainous areas because we've just farmed so much of our grasslands. The other thing that distinguishes grasslands, I suppose, is if you don't have enough water, it gets really arid and you get a desert. But there are a lot of very arid adapted grasslands, especially as you get further down south. So the Chihuahuan Desert is essentially a grassland as well as a desert. And, you can graze cattle on it. I think if you can graze cattle on it, you used to graze bison on it, and it sort of qualifies as a grassland. And bison used to be pretty much all over the continent and have this really deep relationship with grasslands. I was also going to say, if you have too much water and not enough fire and not enough grazing, that's when the woody plants start encroaching and you end up with more of a woodland.
I see.
Okay. So when we're talking about, the grasslands and the birds, why, a lot of people would think like, hey, more trees, that would be better for birds, right? But why do we need grasslands for birds?
Exactly. Yeah, I think of grassland birds as almost a really good emblematic example of how birds are such good indicators. Canaries in the coal mine, all that stuff. If we're not doing a good job with the environment, the birds are one of the first species that we notice is declining. They may not be the first to be declining, but they're so noticeable and so many people love birds that they're a really good indicator that way. And grassland birds are a bit like a Goldilocks type of group in general. So they tend to be quite specialized and they tend to be very sensitive to things not being quite right. And another thing that makes managing grasslands for bird biodiversity a really helpful indicator for anyone who wants a healthy grassland. So if you're a rancher, you want a lot of different plants on your grassland. You want a healthy, resilient grassland, biodiverse grassland. But also the birds tell you that because different grassland birds prefer different heights of grass. So if you don't have that heterogeneity, if everything is exactly the same height, you just don't get as many types of birds. So for example, mountain plovers like really bare soil. whereas there are other grassland bird species that like it a bit more well covered, like more ground cover. And that makes them a really helpful indicator. It's also just so cool to go out. When I lived in Montana, I used to go and just bird on people's ranches for this collaboration between the local Montana Audubon and the land trust. And if you showed a rancher all the list of bird species that their ranch supported, that was just such a great way to build common ground and to sort of show them that they had this biodiversity right there that they were already doing such a great job with. And it made the idea of setting up a conservation easement so much more palatable than going into thorny issues like wolves or, people are worried about bison because they worry that they carry diseases that might be transmitted to cattle, which is not really true. But there's a lot of stuff going on with charismatic large mammals that birds don't have to worry about so much.
Why should birders, care about this effort that's going on? They've got the ranchers that are on board with it, and so they're doing a lot of work. But what should birders know, I guess, about this effort?
I think what a lot of birders might not appreciate is that because, grasslands are relatively underrepresented, and they're just one of the most, I think, unprotected biome worldwide, including in North America and including in the US. And this actually happens to be the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists. So we know grasslands just need an awareness campaign worldwide. It's not just in the US. They also just happen to be so convenient for humans to grow their food in. So I think we don't really appreciate as birders or as any kind of human that uses resources from the earth that we depend so much on what grasslands do, not just to grow our food in terms of modern agriculture, but in terms of the carbon storage potential that grasslands have. So the grasslands in the US store about as much carbon as the forests in the US. That's something that the survey revealed most people don't know, even if they come from a grassland state. I think as a birder, I just care because we all love our birds. And I guess it's a slightly nerdy group of birds superficially, because grassland birds do tend to be fairly discreet and little brown birds, little brown jobs. But they are extremely beautiful when you get up close, and they do produce wonderful songs and really interesting mating displays. And I guess on the subject of mating displays, some of the most iconic grassland birds that people spend a lot of time and money going after would be all the prairie chickens, sage grouse, all those lekking species are fascinating to watch. And I think we just don't really appreciate how much migratory birds, including things like sandhill cranes. So I was recently on a trip to Nebraska to see that epic congregation of sandhill cranes, hundreds of thousands of individuals, all along the Platte River. And you could say cranes are not just grassland birds, but they depend on grasslands a lot for their migratory journey. Same for the endangered whooping crane. It's mostly up and down the whole flyway that species depends on is private lands, private ranches primarily, or croplands that the birds depend on. So why birders should care, or anyone should care really, about grasslands and grassland birds are that we all need those grasslands for our clean air, clean water, our food. And they just have so much biodiversity, including all the pollinators that pollinate our food plants and other things, and without which we wouldn't have much food for those birds that we care about.
Yeah, so you mentioned stopover stuff briefly there. So it's not just the what we think of as grassland species, the prairie chickens, the grouse, the sparrows. It's all the other species that use these lands as stopovers while they're traveling from one forest to the next or from one wetland to the next. Like they're making those stops throughout there and sampling some of the foods along the way.
Exactly. It's, imagine actually this resonates with anyone with an electric vehicle. It's so hard to recharge your electric vehicle in some states. Similarly with birds, they need to
Hmm.
refuel. And if there's nowhere for them to refuel on their migratory journey, say from the Arctic, a lot of our shorebirds actually will stop by in wetlands on
Hmm.
grasslands. There's a whole region called the prairie potholes as well, which is especially famous for that. So without enough of these stopover sites, it's pretty much impossible for a grassland bird to make
Yeah.
it. And that includes a lot of migratory species that spend time during their migration on grasslands.
Yeah, so it impacts a lot more species than we probably think. And so we need to
Exactly.
work on, conserving and helping support ranchers that are doing that kind of work.
Hmm. Exactly. And making those stepping stones, those fueling stops for the bird.
So why is Cornell involved in this campaign?
It's a very good question. I think the data are just so clear. So the State of the Birds reports have been showing for a long time. Every year, the State of the Birds report comes out. Grassland birds are the group that are declining fastest and have suffered the worst declines. And in a very well-known at this point paper that came out in 2019, the Lab of Ornithology and others showed that grassland birds have declined by over 50% since 1970. So that's the paper that showed that in North America we've lost about 3 billion. We have 3 billion fewer
Yeah.
birds than we did about 50 years ago. And grassland birds are just consistently the worst hit. I think more recently there's been a similar study showing the same pattern in Europe. So we know this is really a problem. And if we want to use science and the power of humans who care to save birds, then what better group to pick than the ones that are declining fastest and perhaps most underappreciated?
Yeah.
So that's a large reason we're part of this campaign, this awareness campaign. One of the findings in this campaign survey that I found really striking was what people didn't know about grasslands. The three things that people really weren't aware of, other than so there was the carbon point that we talked about
Hmm.
earlier. Also, most people think of fire as such an awful thing that most people didn't say fire is really necessary a lot of the time to keep a grassland as grassland, because most of these grass species are so fire adapted that if you don't have regular burns, it just the woodland species take
Hmm.
over. So that fire can be a good thing is maybe fire needs its own PR campaign on the grasslands, right? And then the last point, it gets back to what you were saying about how complex this is, that most of the US grasslands are privately owned, and a lot of them are owned by and managed by ranchers. So you have that very important human dimension in all this, with all that brings the rural economies and the need to keep them feeling supported so that the rest of us can enjoy things,
Yeah.
including recreating on the grasslands.
Yeah. So, do you have any final takeaways about what birders can do to help, or anything that we really need to know about the how birds are impacted by this conservation effort that's going forward with grasslands right now?
In terms of the number of recreational
Hmm.
activities on grassland that people in the survey listed, birding was the fifth
Oh.
after hiking, camping, fishing, and wildlife viewing. So wildlife, interestingly, in the survey was separated from birding. And things like hunting, which get a lot of press sometimes with
Hmm.
the actions by groups like Ducks Unlimited or Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, that wasn't listed as high as birding. So that's another reason, actually, that this is such a powerful way of supporting working lands. And I guess as birders, what we can do is in addition to watching what we eat, is if you're a landowner and you happen to have grass, it's important to think about what pesticides you might be using, whether or not. So lawns don't count as a grassland, I should say.
Monoculture.
A kind of little monoculture of green patch of grass from goodness knows where does not constitute a proper grassland. So I have this little argument with my husband every day almost, or all the time, about why we don't just try to convert our small patch of lawn into native grass instead of mowing this sad monoculture all the time. So this is a very personal thing as well. But I think recognizing that if you do have a large enough plot for grassland birds like bobolinks, if you're in the east, to nest in, it's important to try not to mow it all down, because then you're mowing down all those nests. Grassland birds tend to nest on the ground and in the grass. And if you're haying, then there's actually a program that the Cornell Labs Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative supports as well. So there's several groups that work on this. The one I know of through the Lab of Ornithology is called Ag Allies. And I think they're mostly based in Maine. And they basically help to subsidize or offset the costs of delaying mowing, hay mowing, so that birds like bobolinks, grassland birds like bobolinks, can nest safely, bring their chicks through that round of breeding, and then the farmers harvest the hay. It doesn't always work perfectly because depending on when you mow the hay, the nutritional content changes. But it's always good to look out for local land trusts, I think in particular, because they will set up easements with landowners and they will provide support to landowners. And if there's a grassland around, it could be a grassland-focused land trust that you're helping to support. And I know the Lab of Ornithology has a whole section on this with their conservation collaboratives. And maybe just go birding, look for a grassland near you that you might not have been aware of, and figure out where those grassland birds are and go enjoy them.
So you might not have the answer to this, but in terms of like eBird data, are there specific habitat types that are more represented on like eBird lists?
Yes.
How are grasslands
So
rank in that?
different. Not great.
So
I mean, I'm not officially on the eBird team, but that's such a good question, because one of the productions I'm working on right now is to use the story of a really iconic grassland bird, the Sprague's pipit, which is yet again a well-camouflaged little brown bird, but it has the most beautiful song. And the males do these displays where they fly way up in the air and they can display for hours at a time, sometimes not take a break, which is fantastic. And they unite, in a sense, through their migrations, the central grasslands all the way from northern Mexico up to Canada, prairies of Canada, where they breed. And with a colleague, we were trying to animate the importance of the grasslands for these pipits using eBird data, because we have, through Birds Canada, these amazing MOTIS tags, MOTIS trackers that track birds, right? But that doesn't really tell you how important a certain landscape is to all the birds that use it, because you just don't have fine scale enough data. So we were trying to create a sort of species richness, like how many species use these different places, and animate that for every week, little dots moving every week, or a heat map moving for every week of the year. And the short answer is there just was this data hole, especially around northern Mexico. And I think for the central grasslands, this is especially challenging because the landscape is large and it's largely privately owned. So even if you have a rancher, a network of ranchers who are avid birders, it's one family or one set of, a rancher setup covering huge amounts of land, they're not going to have time to eBird, submit their eBird
Yeah.
checklists all the time. So yeah, there is a bit of a gap in that sense.
So the very basic way that birders can help in this effort is to go to Grasslands and go submit eBird lists.
That would be great. I tried to do this when I was a postdoc in Montana. There was this still is a wonderful place called the National Bison Range. And that's now managed by the local Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. It used to be managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service, but it got returned to the tribes. And we were realizing that it's almost impossible to pay people enough, undergraduates or whatever, field assistants, enough money to have people do surveys of birds on foot up and down these very steep slopes on a very small patch of grassland in the greater scheme of things. But at least that is a grassland where you get a lot of visitors, mostly wildlife viewing, but I set up a bunch of hotspots, eBird hotspots, to make it easier. And then we had a little QR code thing that you could scan to see how to submit an eBird checklist, and a very basic cheat sheet of the common sparrows and there's a Vesper sparrow and western meadowlark. If you know those two songs, you're probably capturing about 90% of the birds that you're hearing in 10 minutes. So we try to arm all the visitors with that basic knowledge and then have them use participatory science through eBird to submit a whole series of checklists across the bison range. If all the ranches that have visitors, like all the dude ranches, had time for this, that would be amazing. I think in the meantime, it's just good to support ranches. Maybe also keep an eye out for policy programs that we know about, or if there's something. So the two that come to mind are the Farm Bill is currently making its way, I think, through the Senate, and groups like the American Bird Conservancy have a lot of good resources on how the Farm Bill could be made to benefit birds more, grassland birds more. And then you also have groups like Maggie Hanna's group that you're talking to, Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, who do a lot of direct outreach and support to ranchers. So that's another thing to look at. And I guess in terms of other policy, I was part of this coalition, or the Lab of Ornithology was supporting this coalition to introduce a national Grasslands Conservation Act, led by other groups like the National Wildlife Federation. And that is essentially another program to have voluntary support, funding for voluntary conservation on grasslands for private landowners.
Okay, so a lot of good options there, but thank you so much for joining us and telling us about grasslands and birds and what all we should be aware of and what we can do to help in this.
Thank you for having me.
So thank you guys both so much, Wenfei and Maggie, for sitting down with us. I know it was very last minute for us to reach out and see if you could teach us a little bit about grasslands. So much information. I unfortunately had to cut so much to be able to fit this into a single episode. We probably should have planned for this to be a couple episodes long, but it was great information. I really enjoyed the conversations. There's so many takeaways. Like the number one takeaway that I just surface level takeaway. I can't remember if it was Maggie or if it was Wenfei that said it, because it was we did these interviews so close together. But the grasslands store their carbon in the ground. Maggie said this. So the grasslands store their carbon in the ground, and I had not even thought about this. I've seen the representations of like native grasslands, and like you see like, oh well, you have the invasive grass and the roots are only going like 6 inches deep, and then you have like the native grasslands and they have like these big huge giant root systems that are huge. And so that's the sort of takeaway that I have from this, that a lot of this carbon sequestration that's done in the grasslands is not the surface level, easy to see big trunks of trees. It's stuff underground, this interconnected network of life that's just below the surface that is all not just carbon, not just the roots, but the other organisms and individuals and stuff that are living in the soil and under the soil.
So something you had said when we were talking to Maggie was about how when we were kids, we learned that conservation is like roping something off and like just letting it do its own thing.
Getting people uninvolved.
Yeah, and so that's something about grasslands that I find really interesting is that we have to work the land to get them to react the way that they naturally would have. And so, that's why cattle grazing, of course, like not having super dense cattle on a site is good for it, but having like dispersed cattle throughout it helps to mimic how the bison treated the plains.
Yeah.
And that's something that is really important when we're looking at like the conservation of these properties and to have locations for birds is we need the cattle on it.
Yeah.
And
we need fire, we need cattle, we need things that are happening keeping the grasslands disturbed and keeping them grass.
Yeah, so I just learned so much, and I hope you all are ready for me to just like hyperfixate on grasslands because this is a really important issue, and I think it's totally overlooked. The report is on their website, and we'll include that in the show notes because that has so much interesting information in there. So I hope you will check out Grasslands Coalition. We'll toss that information in the show notes too, so you can learn more about this and help inform yourself and inform others. So hopefully we don't have all of the statistics that they present about like nobody knows anything about grasslands and they don't really care about grasslands because they are important habitats. We see things like the prairie chickens and the sage grouse and bobolinks and things like this because of those habitats.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Wenfei and Maggie, for taking the time out of your busy days, out of your busy schedules to teach us a little bit and hope to teach all of you guys that are listening a little bit more about grasslands so you can appreciate them as much or come close to appreciating them as much as Wenfei and Maggie do and all these organizations that are partnered together. And also thank you all for listening to this podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and or learned something new. Please, please, please rate, review, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Music, or anywhere else you listen to us. If you would like to connect with us on the socials, you can follow us at Hannah Goes Birding and Eric Goes Birding on Instagram. You can follow our Facebook page at Hannah and Eric Go Birding. You can send us an email at hannahyandericgobirding@gmail.com. You can also check out our website at www.gobirdingpodcast.com. Tell us what you think and share the love of birding with your friends.